Hey guys, in this video we're going to go over a game from the ChessGoals Simul number 2. In this game I'm playing against ChessPriyome, who beat me in the first Simul. It was actually my only loss in the first Simul, so this was sort of our revenge match, if you could say that. And in this game, ChessPriyome has the white pieces, I have the black pieces, and we're going to look at it from Priyome's point of view. And I'll kind of talk through my thoughts during the game and highlight what I think are some critical points. Alright, so we had a Sicilian, or I'm sorry, Caro-Kann, and Priyome went with the two knights variation. And after knight f6, we transposed into something right out of the Caro-Kann repertoire. This is the Tartakower variation with the exchange on f6. So now I'm trying to follow kind of the standard plan that we recommend. Bishop out to d6, castle, rook e8, and then this knight reroutes to f8. So if you look at the opening book here, we're still following theory. Castle, rook e8, c4. There's a lot of moves here that are all pretty much tied in terms of popularity. c4 seems like a reasonable choice. So if you look here, it feels like white has a pretty big advantage. There's all this center control for the white pawns, and black has the double pawns on the f-file. But there is some positional play that black can play for here. You know, oftentimes the f-pawns can control this knight on f3 and could even be pushed later for a kingside attack potentially. So the eval is slightly in white's favor, I would say. If we look up here, it's around 0.1. So knight d7, queen c2, knight f8, bishop d3. So this is the first move that is a little bit out of book. The reason I don't think the timing is the best on bishop to d3 here is because my knight already guards the h-pawn, so I don't have to take the extra time to move that pawn. And after bishop to g4, now I'm already creating a pretty annoying threat. Bishop takes f3, and it's hard to say what white should do with this knight. So instead of bishop to d3, Priyome, I think bishop to e3 would be an improvement here. Or, back when you played c4, maybe c3. And then after knight d7, bishop e3, and play this a little more solid. It seems like a good option as well. Or another thing you could do is instead of bishop to e2, and this is a lot more common, I think, put the bishop on d3 right away, pressuring this h-pawn. Because that's where you ended up wanting the bishop anyways. So bishop to d3 on move 7 might actually be the best improvement for you in the opening. And then you don't have to move this bishop twice. Okay, so after bishop to d3, bishop g4, knight h4, now we see here a 1.6 advantage for black. So it's up to me to figure out, can I capitalize on this advantage? And on the very next move, I gave back any advantage that I had with queen c7. So let's take a look at the engine and see what the engine thinks here is so good for black. Bishop to c7. And if we click the threat button, we can see that the queen is threatening to take on d4, but then there's also ideas of queen d6 eyeing the pawn on h2. So there's a pretty decent attack for black after bishop c7. And I will say that that move didn't even cross my mind. You know, I just thought, let's connect the rooks. Queen c7 felt natural, gaining tempi on this pawn. But looking at it now, I do think it makes sense to just tuck this bishop back, and the queen pressures d4 as well as maybe queen d6 with some mate threats. And as we've seen from some of Jesse's games in our Discord, he's famous for sacrificing a bishop on h3. So if this h-pawn comes up, there could be a sacrifice with the bishop, and then black's other pieces very quickly come into the attack. Okay, so queen c7, g3. I see the engine's giving this a dubious mark, but I don't think this move is too bad. You know, you're guarding the h2 pawn. I think it makes a lot of sense to bring the knight back to g2. And from my point of view, Priyome, your position felt very solid here. And I didn't feel like I had any advantage. I felt this was pretty close to equal during the game. So no problems with this. So now I'm trying to bring back my knight into the game. There is an idea with bishop takes h7 check, but the problem is that bishop might get trapped on h7, and the d pawn is also hanging. So I don't think it's a great idea to take it, and Priyome did not go for that. Bishop to e3, guarding this pawn. And now I played h5. The computer's saying g6 was probably a bit more solid. And I think, I did kind of have some questions about this move later. I was thinking, well, maybe I could attack with the h-pawn. I see this battery hitting h2. But really, the h-pawn was a bit of a weakness because after I played g6, this pawn chain was a little bit vulnerable later on. So I don't think h5 was the best move there. Bishop f5. Yeah, I thought this was a great choice. Trading off these bishops, and if I take you on f5, the queen comes in. I really didn't like the look of this at all because now it highlights how weak this move is with h5. There's no g6 because queen takes f6. So I like this move a lot, bishop f5. All right, I'm trying to bring in my last piece. Computer liked g6, but I think it's reasonable enough. The reason it liked g6 is because in this position there's d5 supposedly. Okay, but let's keep going. We don't want to spend too much time on that move. So now we're kind of reaching this endgame with same color bishops. But the issue for white is that this bishop is on the color of all the pawns. So even though I have these double pawns, I felt like my position was a little bit better here. So maybe we should kind of go back to this point. Thinking in terms of imbalances, we don't really want to play c5 and leave this bishop stuck on the same color as the pawns. So something to keep in mind, looking at this bishop imbalance. All right, g6, I'm just trying to shore up this king side, not allow your queen to come in. Yeah, this was a blunder according to the engine. So h4 gives me a bit of an attack. Trading into this endgame is dead equal. So that's a good takeaway for me because with the queens on the board, I could take advantage potentially of the fact that this king is exposed a bit and also that this is a bad bishop. But once the queens trade off, I think it's possible for white to just really create this fortress that I can't penetrate. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to reroute these pieces to apply pressure to the pawn on d4. But you can see what's happening is even though I have all three pieces hitting d4, white has all three pieces defending. So I'm really not threatening anything here, and the position is still very solid for white. Okay, now this part coming up is embarrassing. I calculated out the move f4, and I was looking through all the lines. After bishop takes, I was looking through all the lines with rook takes. And I thought, okay, bishop d6 check, I could take with rook. And if you take this rook, I take here. If you play here, bishop f6, queen, take, take, and I'm up a pawn. So I had that calculated out. And in a simul, I really try to be careful with how much calculation I do, but I really felt I had that line calculated out well. Rook takes d4. And then in the game, I played bishop takes d4. And then I instantly realized it was a blunder. So this was like a miscalculation on my part. I looked at rook takes d4, ended up playing bishop takes d4. No good explanation for that, because after bishop d6 check, I have to sack the exchange. I didn't see any way out of this. Computer's saying I should have actually took with the other rook. That's interesting. Oh, and then I could take b2. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so here, this is a critical point for you, Priyome. We see this pin on the bishop on d4. I want to win this pawn back, but it's going to take me a little bit of time to do it if you pressure me. So I think b4 is a critical move here. This is what the computer likes as well, because I don't have time to take on d6. And if I play a move like b6, I was thinking you could probably take. I take back, and then maybe you can just get active with these rooks, get some counterplay. So don't make it too comfortable for me to snag this pawn back on d6. I think that was a critical point here, because in the game line, all all of a sudden I got this position with some annoying pressure against your king. So here my idea was I wanted to cut off the king, not allow you to enter. But then we reach this position, and it's really hard to figure out how does white play for a win, because my bishop is going to plant on d4, my king is defending these squares, and your position right now is so solid. If you play for the win, it kind of creates this scenario where both sides are going for pawns and attacking at the same time. And it's not easy to figure out how to limit my counterplay while you try to pick up some pawns. So we repeated a couple times. I actually thought you wanted the draw here, or that you were just trying to gain a little time on the clock. I wasn't sure. But then once I saw rook e6, I knew it was game on. Okay, so rook e7 check. Yeah, I think here taking this pawn is best, because these pawns are extremely weak. And in the game, I was able to hold on to those pawns for a while, which I think helped me a lot. That gave me winning chances. But taking on g6, shattering those pawns, looks good to me. Yeah, I don't see anything too crazy in terms of counterplay. I could go rook d3 and win this pawn. But these pawns are going to come pretty quick with the help of your rook. And I don't see any way I could win any pawns on the king side. You just have too many defenders over here. Okay, so you went for the a pawn, and I grabbed the b pawn. And here, the reason I played c4 is I see this passer, and I see my king helping out. I didn't do a lot of calculation on this position. You know, I figured I could stop this pawn always, but what I really wanted to do was create some problems for you. And I saw the clock too. So you were down to a minute 37. That makes it tough when you see a pass pawn coming with 3 pieces nearby to support it. So that's the reason I went for c4. But computer's saying it's a mistake. So here, rook d2. Oh yeah, I didn't see rook d2 during the game. Rook d2 is kind of tough to deal with. Hitting the bishop, this rook is ready to check from behind. So what if king c5? Yeah, I think rook check from behind, because this pawn might drop. And that's the pawn that's causing you issues. Okay, so rook d2, very strong move there. So now we get this position where my bishop is kind of anchored here, and my rook starts to get active from behind. And what I really wanted to do is get my king into one of these light squares. So let's look at this point. This is the smallest advantage I had from this point onwards. Minus 0.6. So the move played in the game was rook a4. Let's just see what the engine thinks. Rook a6. Oh yeah, going after the g pawn. So if there's time to do it, it makes sense. If I play rook b2, you can trade on b2. Oh no, you can't trade on b2. Okay, so if I play rook b2, you have to come with the king to help out. If I don't play rook b2, if I try to cut your king off, there are checks from behind. So this looks natural, trying to get rook b2 in. But you can check from behind. And if here, you can actually sacrifice. So that was something that I was trying to watch for in the game, is when could you sacrifice for either my bishop and pawn or the c pawn, as well as grabbing some of these kingside pawns. This looks very much drawish, very close to a draw. It's going to be hard to win, because even rook and bishop against rook is hard to win, and you're going to probably pick up a second pawn soon. But after rook a4, it kind of allowed me the position I wanted. So I was very careful here, and I repeated a bunch of times going forward just to try to limit your counterplay. And I thought you did a good job creating counter chances and looking for different ways to get back into the game. But what I really wanted to do is get my king coming up on the light squares, and then kind of have these possibilities to check back and forth, pick up a pawn, maybe go pick up one of these other pawns, all while trying to limit your counterplay. So here we're dancing around a bit, but in the end I got into this situation where I'm either winning this pawn or checking here. Like you can't go back to g2 because of the check. And now my rook defends this pawn. So things felt very secure at this point, but I just had to really spend my time to try to play accurately. And here I'm giving up the g-pawn. I didn't really like giving up the g-pawn, but I felt like at some point I have to go for h and f. So that's why I did it. There's a little bit of dancing around again. But eventually my plan is to push the h-pawn and push the f-pawn. And now my king is coming up to help. Yeah, and after king f2 there is bishop to g3 mate. So I think the big takeaway is Priyome in the opening. I would say maybe look into these bishop to d3 lines, especially some of the lines where white queenside castles can be tricky, because you can get a quick attack going against my king and kind of limit my fun in terms of attacking your king side. So bishop d3 and either queenside castle or bishop d3 kingside castle would be good. And then this was the largest advantage. b4 is a critical move. And you were already low on time, so I know it's hard to spot all these tactics. But allowing me to slowly regroup this pawn is kind of what let me back into the game. So even though there was still a small edge after this, I was already feeling like I had some drawing chances here because I was up this extra pawn and I had the bishop anchored there. So b4 I think was the critical moment there. And then at this point, looking to win this g-pawn I think was a big deal. You know, there was a couple points coming up where if you could win the g-pawn and then maybe sack your rook for a bishop or bishop and this pawn, that could get you back into the game. All right, so this was a Simul game against ChessPriyome. A really good game. It was a fun game with a lot of tactics. And thanks for watching the video. Please click the thumbs up button and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching, everyone.